Hey everybody. I'm just going to go live and talk a little bit about my origin story, how I got into podcasting, give you a little bit of a rundown on how that works. So, when I got into podcasting, um, initially at the time I was working as a QA engineer for a company. They're still around. They've been acquired by a company that's been acquired by a company that's been acquired. I was working in QA. I had a coworker that um, bought an iPod. Now, to back up just a little bit, I need to give you a little bit of backstory. So, when I went and worked there, this was my first job out of college. I went there. I basically was the second kind of technical support person at the company. It was a small startup, and things kind of grew from there, and eventually got to the point where I was managing a team of like 20 people who were answering phones and emails, helping people with the product. It was an online backup product called Mozy. And anyway, so we were having that go on. And during that time, I got into programming. And I was really trying to build the team up and things like that and provide them with what they needed in order to get their job done. But what wound up happening was, as I built more and more of this system, I realized that I didn't want to be on management track. I wanted to be on the programmer track. Now, I have a degree in computer engineering, so I had done some programming prior to that, and then had been doing the programming at work. But my degree in computer engineering is much more on the engineering side than on the programming side. And so I did have the kind of background that they were looking for somebody to be a programmer. Now, I actually applied. I went and talked to my boss. He went and talked to the programmer boss. The programmer boss came back and said, no, he doesn't have what we're looking for. Now, I had picked up skills in the programming software, Ruby on Rails. I had picked up skills in Ruby on Rails prior to applying, but it didn't matter. I could not get that full-time developer job, and I really wanted it. And so I kind of hung in there for a while, right? Thinking, okay, well, I'll just stay on the management track and see where it goes. Well, it turns out that there were some other politics going on, and eventually I got pushed into sort of a tech support role for the tech support department, and somebody else was doing all the management stuff. And at that point, I was just like, there's got to be a way through to get into programming. And I really liked the developers of the company. We had a good relationship and a good rapport, but I didn't have any way to move up. I didn't have any way to move forward, to really get what I wanted. And so I went back to my boss, and I just looked at him. I said, look, you're not listening to me when I tell you there are issues in the department. You've put this other guy in charge of a lot of the day-to-day operations, and I'm not happy where I am. And so if there's not a way for me to get into development, what can I do? And it turned out that they had kind of been looking for somebody to move into quality assurance. And so I moved over into the quality assurance department, started working with another guy. And it was just two of us in this little office. And anyway, so I was doing the QA on a lot of the product, and I knew the product very well. I knew the architecture overall very well because I'd been troubleshooting it for a year and a half as part of my job in support. And I had enough technical background to where it wasn't a mystery how they were putting it all together. What it really boiled down to was just that I just didn't have enough experience as a programmer, and I wanted to learn more. So while I was hanging out with this guy named Don, he wound up buying an iPod. Now, this was back when they were, the little, they were like this thick, right? They were like a mile thick, and they had the circle control on them. And I think they actually had spinning hard drives in them still. It wasn't the solid state hard drives that you get in the phones now. But anyway, so he was listening to stuff at work, and he was just cracking up over there. And I'm just like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, well, I'm listening to podcasts. And so he introduced me to podcasts. Well, I didn't have an iPod. And of course, that was my excuse. I don't have an iPod. And he's like, well, you have that Mac Mini sitting on your desk, because I was running the Mac beta for Mozy at the time. And so I was testing new builds all the time. He's like, that has iTunes on it. So I started listening to podcasts, and I found some on Ruby on Rails, which was what I was excited about anyway. and what I wanted to learn. So we sit down, we kind of get things going, and I'm listening to that. I'm listening to a bunch of other podcasts, and I'm thinking, man, some of these guys, one of them his name was Jeff. He wound up interviewing a whole bunch of people that I was just like, wow, this is amazing. He's getting all this advice from these people. There was another one called Rails Envy. The guy that ran that, his name was Greg, ran it with another guy named Jason. And so I thought, well, maybe I should be sharing what I'm learning. Granted, I was a total noob, right? I was a Ruby noob. I could build stuff, but I didn't have a ton of experience and I couldn't get that job. So I had my doubts, but I thought I'd reach out and just see if anybody had some advice for me. So I reached out to Greg and I was like, Greg, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Now, I don't have a lot of experience. I don't have any equipment. I don't know what I'm doing. And I get an email back the next day. I thought this guy was a celebrity. Turns out not a celebrity. He's pretty well known in that community, but he wasn't that hard to reach. I just sent him an email. And so he emails me back and he's like, you should totally start a podcast. You should totally get one going. And it's funny because I thought, okay, well, if Greg thinks I can do it, then maybe I can do it, right? I kind of found somebody that would help me get this rolling. And so I reached out to him. I was like, okay, well, what style should I do? Because I didn't want to duplicate his show. His show covered news in the Ruby on Rails community. I'm like, I don't want to duplicate your show. So what should I cover? And he's like, oh, you should interview people. And I was thinking, yeah, I could interview all these people that I'm seeing on the internet, speaking at conferences and things like that. And I can ask them all my questions and talk about what they're working on and kind of have this radio-ish show. And so I did. I was like, well, you're pretty well known. Do you want to be my first guest? And he said, sure. So I got him on and he was my first guest on the podcast. Then I reached out to another person that I had seen speak at one of the other conferences named James. And James came on and, did the interview with me. And then I wound up doing a bunch more. And on the weeks that I didn't have a guest, I would just get on and talk about what I was learning and talk about some concept in Ruby on Rails. And I was talking about it from this total noob place, right? And what wound up happening was that I started having these conversations. I started building this rapport with people. And then I started applying for new QA jobs because Donna told me that I wasn't making enough. And on a whim, I applied to a couple of development jobs. And within a couple of weeks, I had gone in, I had done the interview with them. And granted, the interview did not. They asked me a bunch of stuff and my answer was, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't know that. Right. But I was willing to learn and I had built conversational skills, so that the technical guy that was interviewing me, I could turn it around and actually get the answers from him. Right. And he was totally willing to give me the answers anyway. But because I would turn it around and kind of built those interview skills on my end, right, as a podcaster, and because he was willing to actually coach me a little bit, incidentally, he did the call in the middle of his daughter's 8th birthday party. I wound up getting the job. So all of a sudden I had this job as a software developer, got a $20,000 raise basically by switching jobs. And it was amazing. And it turned out that it really kind of taught me a couple of lessons, but I want to keep going because there's more to it. That eventually a year later, I wound up getting laid off from that job. And by then I had also started doing a screencast series. And so I was making videos and podcasts. And I went in for an interview. I got laid off from that job. I went home. It was our 4th wedding anniversary. And anyway, so I went in. I think it was our 2nd. Anyway, so it was our wedding anniversary. I went home, applied to a bunch of jobs. Got ready to go out to dinner with my wife for our anniversary, and I get a call back from one of the applications. And they said, can you come in and do an interview? So I just drove into town, did the interview, and I got out of the interview and I was probably a mile or so from their office. And I get this call back, when can you start? And I was like, tomorrow. And they're like, well, great. Well, we went and looked at some of your screencasts and we listened to some of your podcasts. And it's pretty obvious to us that you know what you're doing. I'd been programming professionally for a year. Okay. And so we'd like you to join our team. I wound up being a team lead there with a year's programming experience under my belt. And it all just worked out. And what I found was that your confidence in what you know and what you can do makes a major difference. I mean, I just went in there and just, showed them what I had, right? And that gave me enough confidence to actually talk to them and get that job, right? And same with the previous job, my first programming job. Yeah, I showed up and I showed enough poise and confidence, and a lot of times that's what people want. The other thing is that your ability to connect with people really makes a major difference, and you can see just from that whole journey, right, that I was able to get that programming job. And so it wasn't just that I got the job I wanted. It was also that I was able to build some skills and build some confidence so that I could actually go in and accomplish what I wanted. So yeah, I mean, that's essentially my podcasting story. I mean, there's more to it. There's been much more journey past that, but I mean, we did that 13 years ago, and today I run a podcast network where we produce about 18 shows a week. I talk to people all over the world, from big companies that make big tech, and cover the technologies that they're using to do what they're doing. And that never would have happened if I hadn't just pulled the trigger and gone for it. And, so go out there, take some action, build up some confidence and some skills, and just go for it. You'll see that I'm actually doing the video thing. The video thing's new to me, but, and I'll probably add some polish to it later. But I committed to doing this, and I pulled the trigger, and I'm going for it. So anyway, that's what this is about. So all that said, if you're willing to take action, then what I'm trying to put together here is essentially a place where you can come and you can learn the steps. I mean, I didn't have this when I started because podcasting was brand new. But just walk you through the steps of getting things set up and running and growing and monetizing and, supporting your business. So if that's what you're looking for, just take some rapid action and come over here and get some help.